there's more.
Of
course, Jaden Smith was
There's more. Okay, hang up there. Can't get YouTube to play. Okay. Lahire tried to cheer up, but he was not able to do. He sighed like a zephyr and presently said, "Well, I'll do it for you, but before I would do it for another. I swear I." "But don't swear, break it off." No game stand with yucky old neck. Break it off. It is only by his baton when it in her presence and would try to manage it. Now that it was so old and stubborn a habit, and such a solace and support to his declining years, that tough old lion went away from that there a good deal tamed and civilized, not to say softened and sweetened, for perhaps those expressions were hardly fit to him. Noel and I believe that when he went away from Joan's influence, his old aversion would come up so strong in him that he could not master them, and so wouldn't go to man. But we got up early in the morning to see. Well, he really went. It was hardly believable, but there he was, striding along, holding himself grimly in his duty, and looking as pious as he could, but growling and cursing like a fiend. It was another instance of the same old thing. Whoever listened to the voice and looked into the eyes of Joan of Arc fell under a spell and was not his own man anymore. Satan was converted, you see. Well, the rest followed. Satan was converted, I guess I call him Satan. Well, the rest followed. Joan rode up and down the camp, and wherever that fair young form appeared in that shining armor with that sweet face to grace the vision and perfect it, the rude host seemed to think they saw the god of war in person, descended out of the clouds, and first they wondered, then they worshipped. After that, she could do with them what she would. In 3 days it was clean. It was a clean camp and orderly, and those barbarians were herding to divine service twice a day like good children. The women were gone. Lahire was stunned by these marvels. He could not understand them. He went outside the camp where he wanted to swear he was that sort of a man, sinful by nature and habit, but full of superstitious respect for holy places. The enthusiasm of the reformed army for Joan, in devotion to her, and the hot desire she had aroused in it to be led against the enemy, exceeded any manifestation which Lahire had ever seen before in his long career. His admiration of it all, and his wonder over the mysteries and miracle of it, were beyond his power to put into words. He had held his army cheap before, but his pride and confidence in it knew no limits now. He said, 2 or 3 days ago, it was afraid of a hen roost. One could storm the gates of hell with it now. Joan and he were inseparable, and a quaint and pleasant contrast they made. He was so big, she was so little. He was so gray and so far along in his pilgrimage of life, she so youthful. His face was so bronzed and scarred, hers so fair and pink, so fresh and smooth. She was so gracious, and he was so stern. She was so pure, so innocent, he such a cyclopedia of sin. In her eyes were stored all charity and compassion in his lightnings. When her glance fell upon you, it seemed to bring benediction and the peace of God, but with his it was different, generally. They rode through the camp a dozen times a day, visiting every corner of it, observing, inspecting, perfecting, and wherever they appeared, the enthusiasm broke forth. They rode side by side, he a great figure of brawn and muscle, she a little masterwork of roundness and grace. He a fortress of rusty iron, she a shining statuette of silver. And when the reform raiders and bandits caught sight of them, they spoke out with affection and welcomed in their voices, and said, "There they come, Satan and the page of Christ." All 3 days that were in Blois, Joan worked earnestly and tirelessly to bring Lahire to God, to rescue him from his bondage of sin, to breathe into his stormy heart the serenity and peace of religion. She urged, she begged, she implored him to pray. He stood out the 3 days of our stay, begging almost piteously to be let off, from just that one thing, the impossible thing. He would do anything else, anything, command, and he would obey. He would go through the fire for her if she said the word. But spare him this, only this, for he couldn't pray, had never prayed. He was ignorant of how to frame a prayer. He had no words to put in it. And yet, can you believe it? She carried even that point. She won that incredible victory. She made Lahire pray. It shows, I think, that nothing was impossible to Joan of Arc. Yes, he stood there before her and put up his mailed hands and made a prayer. And it was not borrowed, but was his very own. He had none to help him frame it. He made it out of his own head, saying, Fair, sit, God, I pray you to do by Lahire as he would do by you if you were Lahire and he were God. Then he put on his helmet and marched out of Joan's tent, as satisfied with himself as any one might be who was arranged a perplexed and difficult business to the content and admiration of all the parties concerned in the matter. If I had known that he had been praying, I could have understood why he was feeling so superior, but of course I could not know that. I was coming to the tent at that moment and saw him come out and saw him march away in that large fashion. And indeed, it was fine and beautiful to see. But when I got to the tent door, I stopped and stepped back, grieved and shocked, for I heard crying, as I mistakenly thought, crying as if she could not contain nor not endure the anguish of her soul, crying as if she would die. But it was not so. She was laughing, laughing at Lahire's prayer. It was not until 36 years afterwards that I found that out. And then, oh, then I only cried when that picture of young carefree mirth rose before me out of the blur and mist of that long vanished time again, no more in this life. Fair sit, God, I pray you do. Fair sit, God. Oh, excuse me. Fair Sir God, I pray you to do by Lahire as he would do by you if you were Lahire and he were God. That is